There are many stories, many characters in the Bible that have become familiar to us, perhaps because we know the stories, because we attend church regularly, and we read our Bible every day. But there are also characters and stories in the Bible that have become familiar to us simply because we started to use them in everyday conversation, or if not everyday conversation, certainly often enough that they've become known to us in the way in which we use them just daily. The mark of Cain to Lazarus. The wisdom of Solomon to Judas. Right? We've come to use some of these expressions, and we say them in conversation or we read them somewhere, we know instantly what that means. And the Good Samaritan is certainly one of those. You may be familiar with the parable. You might know the story because you attend church regularly and read your Bible every day. But you might also know it simply because we use that expression quite frequently. How often do we see in the news a story of a Good Samaritan? And what that means is a stranger who showed kindness and compassion to another. Which is good. I mean, how great would it be if we all lived that way and showed kindness and compassion to a stranger to the point where we didn't use the expression Good Samaritan anymore? We wouldn't have to because we're all doing it. It wouldn't be so unusual. We wouldn't read a story in the paper or see it on the news or read it on our phones because it was something unusual. Because it happens all the time. How great would that be? And not only how great would that be, how happy would Jesus be if that happened? Hang on a second, though. As great as that would be, and as easy as it is to hear the story and go, oh, clearly it's a story about kindness and compassion. Everyone is my neighbor. Yes, except not everyone is in the story. The characters aren't just anybody, are they? Otherwise, the story would go, somebody came along, and then the next person came along, and then this third person came along. Or at best, a stranger came along, then another stranger, but a third stranger stopped. Except Jesus doesn't tell the story that way, does he? Again, it would be great if even if we just got to the point of it's a story about sharing love and compassion and grace to your neighbor, and everyone is your neighbor, that would be awesome. But we're not ever going to get there unless we acknowledge the elephant that is in the story, which is that Jesus doesn't say anybody. He quite specifically says somebody. A man was traveling from Red Deer to Edmonton. Had trouble with his car, had to pull over to the side of the road. Got out, tried to fix the car, couldn't fix the car. Was about to call AMA on his phone when some guys on motorcycles pulled up, and he thought, oh, this is great, they're going to help me. Turns out they were bikers from BC, and they beat the man, took all his possessions, including his phone, and left him bleeding and dying at the side of the road, and drove off. Oh no, thought the man to himself, what am I going to do? I hope someone comes along to help me. It isn't long, of course, before a vehicle comes down the road, and he looks up and he sees it coming, and he thinks to himself, oh, thank goodness I'm saved, because he looks up and he sees this giant rig. It's bright red, it looks like it's brand new, and it's got the word freedom across the front of it. But as the truck gets closer, it slows down just long enough for the driver to lean on their horn repeatedly, and I mean repeatedly, roll down their window and yell, good for you, exercising your constitutional right to lie and bleed at the side of the road, and then drives off. In the distance, he can hear, "Freedom!" It's not long, though, before another vehicle comes along. Although, it's not so much a vehicle this time as a motorcade. Oh, I'm saved. I must be saved now. Turns out it's the Pope on his way to Maskwacis. The motorcade slows down. The man, "Oh, of course I'm going to be saved." Slows down just long enough to slide by, and in the distance he can hear, "I'm sorry." Despairing, the man realizes that this is not going to end well, and just as he's about to give up hope, another vehicle comes down the road. It's a big black limousine, and instead of accelerating past him, the car pulls over. A man gets out of the front seat wearing a really nice suit, and he goes, "Okay, I think we're all right." He opens the back door, and out steps Justin Trudeau, who comes over and helps the man. And he says, "Here, come get in the back of the vehicle, we'll take you to the hospital." And they take the man to the hospital. He personally escorts him in. And the Prime Minister says to the doctors there, "Whatever it takes, just take care of this man. And when you're ready to release him from the hospital, whatever it costs, please contact Alberta Health Services because that's a provincial responsibility." And he leaves. Which of these showed compassion on their neighbor? If there wasn't something in that story to offend you, I've failed, obviously. Because something in that story surely should have offended you. And while I'm not suggesting that Jesus is offensive, I do think that he tells the story the way he tells it, with the characters that he puts in it, specifically to challenge you to think about it. It's not just about a stranger. It's not. It's about, first of all, your expectations of those who should show kindness and why you think they should show kindness. It's also about your expectations for who shouldn't show kindness or compassion and why. Not generically in a society sort of way or a cultural sort of way, but you personally. This isn't just a story for us to discuss in the big room as a group so that I can tell you what it means and you can go, "Ah, yes," and wisely leave. It's so that you personally can look at this story and go, who is it that I've expected to behave a certain way because they're supposed to be good? And let's bear in mind, sidebar, history of religion and lawyers. First of all. And secondly, who am I personally expecting would not help me because I have a, what's the nicest way I can put this, negative perception of them. And maybe it's not just cultural, maybe it's personal. I always like to remind people, and if you've seen this, great. If you haven't, you should find it on YouTube. I always like to remind people of, there's a comedy duo from England that back in the day called Mitchell and Webb, and they did sketch comedy, and they did a skit based on the story of the Good Samaritan that starts with Jesus wrapping up the story saying, "It was a Samaritan, if you can believe it. Of all people, it was a Samaritan." At which point somebody in the crowd listening goes, I can believe that because I know some Samaritans who are actually really good people. And then somebody else goes, yeah, we vacationed in Samaria, and they were just lovely people. They were really nice to us. And before you know it, Jesus has a little bit of a rebellion on his hand that ends with somebody saying, "I think maybe you need to check your inherent biases, Jesus." That's exactly what Jesus is wanting you to do with this story. It's not just about being kind and compassionate to others, particularly strangers. It's wondering about why it is that we sometimes think, that person should be and that person should not be. And why? Don't even stop there, because there's a second side, isn't there? Jesus always talks about relationships, and relationships are a two-way street. So it's not just about the offering of kindness and compassion, it's the willingness to accept it. Would you welcome an act of kindness and compassion from someone you consider to be your enemy? Or someone that you are suspicious of? Would you? This is one of the greatest things about the way Jesus tells stories, is that Jesus tells stories like he's standing at the front of a giant auditorium full of people. Here's a story for everyone, but at the same time is talking to each and every one of us. It's really easy to take this story and Bible study the business out of it. It's easy to do that and walk away from it going, I see the point. Excellent, I understand that. It's another thing entirely to embrace the story for yourself personally. Try and understand not just the issue of kindness to strangers, but also where it challenges us to wonder about who we might wonder about because we expect them to be kind and they're not, or that we expect that they're not going to and they are. Who are those people for you? I like to think sometimes, as you know, I have quite the imagination. I like to think sometimes, I'm always talking about how Jesus, we hear this story and then it stops, he moves on, but I think there was more to that and there was more discussion and more engagement and everything. I have a sneaking suspicion that the way Jesus told this story was that each of the three characters had actual names. Not just the priest, the Levite, which is a lawyer, by the way, priest, Levite, and Samaritan, but, so-and-so the priest, or so-and-so the Levite, so-and-so the Samaritan. Because Jesus wouldn't have just left it at that generic level of, it's somebody that does this thing. Here's their label. He would have wanted us to engage it more personally. He would have given them names. I really think he would have. And it might not have necessarily been somebody everybody knew, or even that Jesus knew. He would have just given them a name to make it more personal for you. So that we know it's not just about the kindness of strangers, but the kindness and compassion of people we know. Because now we're getting back to everyone is your neighbor. Your neighbor is the person who lives next door to you. And sometimes we know them well and sometimes we know them not at all. Your neighbor is the person who's sitting in the seat next to you, and sometimes we know them and sometimes we know them not at all. Your neighbor is also somebody on the other side of the world that we may know or may not know at all. The point is that you should. And that in order to create that kind of a relationship, we need to wander beyond simply thinking something about somebody because they have a label or something generic. Because then we can, it's like everything else in the Bible, right? Then at that point we can hold it out here and we can go, yeah, that's a nice idea, that's a great thing to live up to. Or, no, I don't really care for that, but it's over there so I don't have to worry about it. And it becomes something in here. It becomes something we can take to heart, something that we can live into the world every day.